Welcome to Bitter Reality Brewing. Yes, this is the top 10 tips, tricks, recommendations, hacks, awareness, suggestions, whatever you want to call it. Week 39. And I know right now a lot of people are going, oh, he's bringing them back? I'm just bringing some really good ones, and I mean really good tips to you. And it is week 39. I'm definitely going to be doing a week 40, but I just had these great ones sitting and thinking about them. And I'm like, you know what? I just need to knock out the video, tell you what they are, and let you know. Keep watching too. I've got a huge thing about how to add chocolate to your beer. Huge, great article. They did like almost, I think it was 21 different tests. This is back in January, February. I'm not gonna read the magazine to you. You have to subscribe to the magazine, not to me on that one. But don't forget, like, subscribe, keep sharing. Definitely appreciate that. But yeah, it was one of the best articles I've ever seen about adding chocolate to a beer. And we're gonna cover coffee, we're gonna cover honey, and how to get the most out of those items. So without further ado, let's go right into number one. Number one, if you're brewing outside and you don't have good cover, like you're not under a garage or under a canopy or something, number one, check the weather the day before you brew. Wind can be a huge problem. Florida, it can get bad. Oklahoma, you might as well just be like, hey, Dorothy, you know what I mean? We're no place like home. Yeah, I've been there. The wind is insane sometimes. Rain. Yeah, I've had 2 canopies already and one broke. I had to get another one. Rain can be just ridiculous. And I mean, it can come down cats and dogs, and you don't want to be brewing cats and dogs, you know what I mean? Lightning. A lot of us are home brewers are using electrical systems. If you have a thunderstorm, a lightning storm, there is a good possibility you will lose power. Yeah, probably not the best day to recommend for brewing unless you have a good generator. And that's even if you're under a garage or a canopy. Lightning storms are bad. This weekend, heat and humidity. I know you don't think about that. It was in the low 90s. It felt like it was over 100 according to the weather. Yeah, I fully agree. I was dying. I just felt like I needed to go live in the shower just to cool down. It was so hot. Number 2, bubbles in the hose. And I don't have the right kind of hose, but you'll get the point. Bubbles in the hose. You're doing a closed transfer and you see the little bubbles in the hose and you're like, oh my gosh, oxygen is getting into my beer somehow. If you know it's sealed, you know there's no way the oxygen is getting in there. There is a extremely high possibility it's CO2 coming out of suspension. I know you're going, but I didn't carbonate it yet. You were fermenting it. Fermenting causes CO2 release, and not all of it comes up out of the beer. Some of it gets suspended in the beer and stays in the beer. Ask a winemaker. That's one of their big things, is getting the CO2 out of their wine because they don't want carbonated wine. So, bubbles in the hose, don't freak out. It's probably CO2 coming out of suspension. Number 3, quick carb with a dip tube. Yes, when you quick carb, if you're using something, and I only have part of it here, like a Blickman quick carb, use a dip tube. Do not, I repeat, do not use a floating dip tube. Even if it's the Float It 2.0, don't use it. What you're going to do is, if you're going to do a quick carb and you have a floating dip tube, you're going to be pulling your beer from the top and dropping it on top. And that's where it's going to stay. You might be able to quick carb it, but it might take a day or two. It won't be an hour or two. The floating, or if you're using a regular dip tube, what you're doing is you're pulling the beer from the bottom and dropping the carbonated beer on top, and it's, you know what I mean? Slowly moving. And even that's kind of slow because the CO2, or the beer that has CO2 in it, is going to be a little lighter than the beer in the bottom, from my understanding. So, less dense is how I guess you could say. Number 4, warning on oxygen. You can get oxygen in your beer doing this. I've had to do it at least twice, and luckily my beers came out great, but just a warning. You can use a hop bag as a filter. An example, I've had to get my blackberry lime gose and my blackberry lime saison. Yeah, this is the only way I could get the beer out and not get stuff stuck in the bottom of the hose. It was a small nightmare. But yeah, any brew in a bag type system can be used as a filter, but a hop bag works as a great filter. Number 5, fruit additions. And this is not just fruit additions. This is more fruit additions from beginning to end. Everybody thinks about, how do I add my fruit? How do I keep from getting O2 in it? What's the best way to add the fruit? What's the best type of the fruit? You know, do I dice it up? Do I blend it? Do I get a puree? What do I do? That's great. We all think about that. What we don't think about, and I learned the hard way with the blackberries, is how are you going to separate your beer from the fruit when it's done? If you're doing something, and I know this is gonna sound a little weird, but these are ones I've done recently, the guanabana, AKA soursop. You do bananas, zest from citrus, or other fruits. A lot of the fruits, they simply fall out of suspension and go to the bottom, and you take your beer and you rock on. But if you're doing something like blackberries, raspberries, understand if you crush up blueberries, told it does the same thing. Boysenberry, loganberry, pretty much anything with the word berry in it. Yeah, that stuff seems to float up top and everywhere in between, and it's a nightmare to get your beer out of all that mush. It is just like mush, and it just stays in suspension, floats to the top, floats in the middle, floats everywhere. So keep in mind, next time you're doing a fruit addition, think ahead. How am I gonna get my beer out? And don't just think you're coming out of the spout, because some of the fruit hangs out there too. So something to be aware of. Adding gelatin, number 6. If you like to cold crash with gelatin, that's the key. Cold crash with gelatin. Add gelatin just before cold crashing, literally as you're putting it in your kegerator, keezer, or wherever you're cold crashing, or the day after, wherever you want. Just as long as it's going to be cold soon and get cold and stay cold. Do not add gelatin to beer that's going to be sitting at room temperature. It does not do a good job. I have yet to see it do a good job. I've done it several times. Yeah, I'm done. It's got to get cold crashed. And number 2, and I've seen, and this is number 6, but part 2 of 6, don't move the keg, disturb the keg, shake the keg, travel with the keg. I've seen too many people out there who it looks like anywhere from just a haze to gravy. Yeah, if you're putting gelatin in there, I don't know what it is about gelatin. It pulls everything out of suspension, but if you disturb it, it kind of brings it up and holds it permanently in suspension. Not sure how that works. It's just really weird and kind of annoying. I've had that issue once, not gravy, but it was still very foggy, and it had been clear the day before, and I moved it and it was my fault. So, okay, and on to the ones that everybody's probably eagerly awaiting. Just before we get into the chocolate, I've got a couple similar ones. Honey. Honey, don't use honey. If you're trying to get honey flavor in your beer, unless you're damn good and you want to do some back sweetening or something, I'm not a big person for sweet beer, you're gonna get some honey flavor if you do it that way. But the best way to get honey that I've found and have read over and over and over, honey malt. Use a malt that has honey in the description. You're gonna get more hints of honey. It's gonna taste more like honey. You're gonna have less issues. Honey malt, way to go if you want honey flavor in your beer. Easy, simple, not a hard thing to do. There's many other ways of doing it, but that's the easiest way, bottom line. And there are other ways to do it with honey, but honey malt, just stick to honey malt. Coffee, don't use coffee? I didn't say that. How to get coffee flavor? Well, first, one of the best ways is, right here. I've got dark chocolates, which of course are gonna give me roasted coffee flavors. I've got Carafa Special 1, 2, and 3, which are some of my favorites to brew with. They're definitely gonna give me some roasted coffee flavors. And then I have Black Patent, Midnight Wheat. A lot of the black or really dark wheats will be a little smoother, not quite as bitter. I really like wheats for flavoring because the wheats just are so smooth. Now, let's say you go, you know what? I want to do the malts, but I want to do real coffee too. And I would not recommend using only coffee. Definitely use some malts to mix with the coffee to get a nice flavor. I've had a lot of those blonde ales for the little coffee, and they're just bitter and nasty, and something to be aware of. And not all, but yeah, most of them. But if you're looking for rich, complex coffee flavors, focus on using lighter or even medium roasted coffee beans. And you either want to do like a cold drip or, coffee with maybe, if you want to use the coffee beans with a very short exposure. I've heard some people run it long, but I've watched enough videos from actual breweries, and a lot of them, more of them recommend short exposure, sometimes less than 24 hours. Actually, most of them probably less than 36, but most of them are very short exposures. And they're just trying to get a nice natural coffee flavor to go with the coffee malts, so they kind of layer it and get a nice complex flavor. Number 9, this is the one you've been waiting for. If you don't subscribe to Brew Your Own, as you can imagine, I probably subscribe to quite a few magazines. 3, American Home Brewers Association, Beer and Brewing, or you got it, Brew Your Own. But they did one of the most intense researches on how to get coffee. And it says brewing chocolate beers. Great, great article. I'm not going to read it to you. If you subscribe to it, you can read it. If you subscribe, I think you can look at back issues too. They literally tried cocoa nibs, roast it, ground cocoa nibs, roast it, brewing cocoa, roasted, non-roasted cocoa powder, chocolate malt, and I mean real chocolate, pale chocolate malt, chocolate extracts, oil, alcohol-based, water-based. They dried things in the mash, the boil, primary fermentation, secondary, at bottling, at kegging. And I'm looking at 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 different tests they did. And many of them were different ways of doing it, different temperatures, blending some of the different ways of doing it. Here's what they found, and I'm gonna give you a quick summary of what they found, the best way to get chocolate in your chocolate beer, okay? Back to the malts, and starting with your crystals, 120 to 190, you're gonna get nice dark toffee and hints of stuff that's going to complement the chocolate. One thing they didn't test and they didn't do that I've found helps is a hint of vanilla. Vanilla, it's just, you expect that in chocolate, just a hint of vanilla. Bourbon vanilla, really good. And I just use extract direct from, with alcohol based, out of Trader Joe's, and it works beautifully. But that will complement your chocolate. But what they said is layer. Mash using chocolate malts. I've got chocolate rye, I've got carafas, I've got chocolate malt, dark chocolate malt, chocolate wheat. You name it, I probably have it if it's a chocolate malt. Now, the one thing they found that also seemed to help or complement was a little bit of pale chocolate malt. I have a bigger bag down below stored, but a little bit of pale chocolate malt definitely helped to bring that chocolate flavor out. Not too much, but a little bit. And then lastly, they used either medium or dark roasted cocoa nibs or chocolate cocoa nibs, basically cocoa nibs, both in the mash. Am I right? Let's see if I remember right. Yeah, the mash and the boil, and even in the secondary. Yes, in the mash, the boil, and the secondary. And they got amazing, amazing chocolate. And that was kind of like their dream brew, is to use chocolate throughout. But it's all about layering. They didn't find any major benefits using syrups or extracts or any of that other stuff. They just went layer the chocolate, and the chocolate malts really brought the most. The rest brought additional layers of chocolate, so it just tasted like an amazing chocolate beer if you're into that type of thing. Number 10, and the last tip, going back to coffee. Watch your IBUs. If you're brewing a big coffee beer or anything you're throwing cocoa nibs in, or coffee, I'm back to chocolate, sorry. Kind of coffee, beans, coffee, whatever you're doing, if you're gonna throw it in the brew, it can add a bit of bittering to the beer, which, like I said, the blonde ales that people do with the coffee just to me taste nasty and usually over bitter. But yes, real coffee and coffee beans add additional bittering. So keep your IBUs down so that when you bring that in, you're back to where you really want it to be. Thank you again for joining us here at Bitter Reality Brewing. Don't forget, like, subscribe, keep sharing. Definitely appreciate the sharing. And I'm not going to say week 40 will be out next week, but I'm working on it, and hopefully I'll be bringing that to you soon. Cheers. Thank you.